And I thought it was quite interesting that there was a report from JMP Securities that estimated that if Amazon fully deploys autonomous vehicles for the middle mile transport and completes its transition to electric vehicles for the last mile delivery, it will cut global shipping costs by 20%, which very conveniently is $20 billion. Now, in the short term, Amazon is on track to save $7 billion. So it's not just a pipe dream. This has begun. They're going to save $7 billion annually as they convert the last mile fleet to Rivian electric vans by 2030. Hi there, and welcome to Stock Club, a podcast brought to you by MyWallSt. I'm Emmet Savage, and joining me today is Anne-Marie King. Before kicking off, I'd like to remind our listeners that MyWallSt has a service called Invest Plus that I believe is the greatest value investing service in the world. You get one deeply researched stock every single Tuesday straight to your inbox, which we call Charging and Fearless, which is named after the two statues of Wall Street. At the end of the month, the team agree on which from the months we most believe will beat the market. And best of all, you also get stock of the month, which has absolutely annihilated the market and outperformed the S&P 500 by fivefold since we launched the service several years ago. It's really smashing it. And I know what you're thinking, folks. You're thinking, that's a $10,000 service. That's not for me. I'm going to hit fast forward. Don't touch it, because it's not a $10,000 service. It's a $199 service, which if you're driving, I appreciate you've just swerved a little bit. And guess what? If you email pod@mywallstreet.com, we'll knock $50 off for the first 7 people. So that's like only $149 per year, basically face melting value. And you know you should do it. So just write the email. It's okay to do it while you're driving. You heard it here on the podcast. Actually, I probably should take that back, because I don't even know what wrath will follow me. Just pull in an email is quick. Anne-Marie, I've been learning French for some time, but I did not know until a moment ago that folie à deux is a psychological condition also known as shared psychosis. And it's also the name of the new Joker movie, which is being absolutely panned. $40 million domestic ticket sales in the opening weekend, which is a far cry from the $100 million that predecessor brought in its debut in 2019. A great movie. I loved that movie. But I think I'll give Folie a miss. What's happening in Gotham?
Yeah, I mean, I actually didn't love the first one. So I'm not, maybe like I mean, I'm not happy that the movie failed. I'm not happy when any movie fails, particularly when a writer director has been given such a large budget. I think that that's nice to see. You want to be empowering creatives in that way. I mean, I think it's difficult to make a sequel about a villain. I think the natural arc of a villain, and I think the ones that we remember the most, are typically ones that have an incredible run in a single movie. And the natural ending of that movie is their downfall. I think there's a broad assumption that that is the inevitability of a villain, that they will face their demise. And I think from what I have read in terms of the reviews, this film is very much unpacking the fall of Joker that kind of occurs at the very end of the first one. And then it adds Lady Gaga. There's a bit of singing. A lot of people, I think, don't know it was a musical going in, which seems to be a weird marketing tactic that we're in at the minute, where you just hide that it's a musical. You trick people.
Oh, yeah. That's not good. That's not a good look. Actually, my son, who's a huge movie fan and student of movies, said there was a couple of factors converging on the movie. The first was that the first one, while it pleased like middle of the bell curve people like me, it totally displeased critics. So the movie maker, I don't even know his name, was trying to make something a little more artsy that appealed to critics, which is never a good approach. And the second was that as you said, the musical thing took a lot of people by surprise, but he'd never directed a musical, which, if you ask me, is hard enough to get right anyway, because musicals, save me. I hate them.
Yeah, Todd Phillips is the guy who directed it, and he's definitely used to a big budget. He got really famous for doing the Hangover movies back in the day, so he's more of a comedic kind of background. But that's definitely been a successful conversion before. You think of Adam McKay, who came from Anchorman, and then he went on to make Vice and The Big Short. incredibly successful exploratory kind of historical films that I think a lot of people really resonate with and have been, I think, really educational in helping people understand like how our politics and our economy work. Um, but yeah, I did read. I mean, one of the big flaws that was pointed out with the first film was that it does borrow heavily from Martin Scorsese movies in a way that sometimes is not subtle. It's not an homage. It's sometimes a blatant theft of movies like Taxi Driver. Um,
And the king of comedy.
yes, exactly. And it was so bad that actually Martin Scorsese this year was asked in an interview, "Oh, did you go and see Todd Phillips' Joker?" I believe Todd Phillips very openly talked about his love of those movies and his desire to reference them. In fact, Robert De Niro is in all three. And Martin Scorsese said, "No,
Yeah.
I don't need to see it. What do I need to see it for?" So I do think there was a sense in the industry that the movie was kind of made. It was kind of a fusing of worlds, as you said, to please critics and to try and please audiences. And so I think that was quite impressive to pull off a first time, but I think it was maybe too difficult to pull off in a sequel.
It's a shame. It's a shame.
Yeah.
It has all the ingredients that I would go for, except for the musical bit.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear Lady Gaga sing her way through a bank robbery or whatever the crime of the moment is. I
It's a
just don't know.
courtroom
That wouldn't
drama.
work.
That's the other thing.
Oh,
Yeah, which also isn't in the
right,
marketing. So I think again that people were kind of caught off guard where they're like, "Oh my gosh,
right.
this is all happening in a courtroom." Yeah, and another thing on musical marketing that's happening recently, and I'm a bit worried about. So you know that Wicked, the very famous Broadway play, is being adapted into a
Yes.
movie this year. It's coming out
Yeah.
in a couple
Yeah.
months, actually. That's
Mhm.
part one. They split the musical in two.
That's ridiculous. No, hold on. What's happening in Hollywood?
But it's not being shown as Wicked Part 1. They're just marketing it as Wicked, but it means that like if you are familiar with the
Uh,
Broadway show, you go in and watch it, you're only getting half the musical, only half the songs,
that's
and
very
it's
disingenuous. You're waiting for the big bit, whatever the
yeah.
big bit is in Wicked, and you have to wait for another year. Forget about it.
Yeah, and presumably like it's the same show, it's the same songs. The Broadway show is only
Yeah.
like 2 hours and 15 minutes long. What are they
I
doing?
saw the poster. Well, actually, last night we went to the movie. Sorry, this is turning into a movie podcast, which is great
Yeah.
because I'm going to hit you a whole load of other movie
Yeah,
stuff.
go
But
on.
hold that for a minute. We went to the movies last night. First time in ages. We went to see Demi Moore's new movie.
Oh yeah. How was it?
It's it's a body horror movie. It's
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
It's very Halloweeny, and I think it's very clever. And I thought it was very quite original. It wouldn't be my first choice of movies. I do like a courtroom drama, but one that isn't sung. But it's very very original, and it is shocking. And if you don't want to see the body kind of butchered in 100 different ways, I wouldn't go to the movie. But it's made by Mubi, which is a firm you told
Yeah.
me about. It's a kind of a Netflix Flix competitor. Their thing is they only ever have 30 movies on their platform, which I'm sure you know better than me, something to do with how they pay for the rights to movies, and they curate movies, and it's being put in the theaters. And I'd say this is them trying to claw their way into the Oscars, and I would not be
Mm.
surprised if they succeed, because the movie is very well made. It's easy on the eye. It's the suspension of disbelief is very high from the start. So when you sit down, you set your expectations accordingly because it's out there. You realize it's like a Stanley Kubrick kind of affair where the characters are somewhat celestial. They aren't real. You can't fully relate to them, but it holds up a mirror, in my words, to the vanity of somebody who is in the public eye all the time, and how they'll do anything to stay beautiful and stay relevant. And faced with the most dire of choices, will still make the choice to look beautiful. So I think it's a movie worth seeing if you're into body horror, shock horrors. So yeah, good. Not a movie to bring the family to. You have to be comfortable with some kind of body horror movies.
Mm.
Like it's not easy viewing. You don't leave the film feeling good. It is entertaining, and as I said, it's easy on the eye, and it's got a nice aesthetic, and the characters are well developed, and it's scoring very well on IMDb, and what's the other one, Letterboxd. So
Yeah.
the world likes it, and I think it's going to do quite well at the awards ceremony. But on the way out, as it happens, I did see a poster for Ariana Grande in Wicked, and no sign of it being part one. So that was a bit of a scam, I have to say.
Yeah, I do think it's a bit of a it's trickery. Why are we tricking audiences? Why is that the marketing
Yeah,
ploy?
especially for what's ostensibly a kids movie. Wicked is not. You shouldn't have to leave a child to wait another year to see the second half.
Is Wicked a
You know,
kids movie?
yeah, it's about a witch, right?
Yeah,
I tell you, I'm
I
not bringing my dad to see it. I'll tell you that
I
much.
think it's kind of I think it's kind of mass media. I think it's intended for more of an adult audience. I read the book it's based on,
Oh,
and that is not a children's book.
oh, really? Well, we
Yep.
went to see it on Broadway many moons ago with our kids, and it was definitely for children. It was very entertaining and all the
Okay.
rest, but it was a stage. Anyway, look, let's stick on the theme of movies because you're our resident expert in all things to do with media and Hollywood, and there are rumors swirling that Max, Peacock, and Paramount Plus
Hmm.
are considering a joint streaming venture to consolidate their market share. And actually, on that, I got new terms and conditions emailed to me from Paramount Plus that were so long I had to copy and drop them into ChatGPT for a summary, only for GPT to burst into flames. I broke it.
Um,
It was ridiculous. So, anyway, what's the details? What's going on with Max Peacock and Paramount Plus?
yeah, I'm sure Paramount Plus probably owns your DNA by now. That seems to be how they're going. Yeah, they're all kind of the small streamers. They're down the bottom of the barrel. And I think they're all having the same realization at the same time, which is we're in fifth place. And I don't know if
Right.
consumers are going to pay for five streamers. So they're trying to figure out what the best deal is now going forward. Of course, we got Apple up at the top at number one. Disney's probably at number two. Not profitable, but it has a phenomenal number of users. So they can probably try and push a little bit more money out of each of them. And then we got Amazon and Apple sitting in kind of third and fourth place. And they're such difficult streamers to compete with because they don't need to make money.
But you didn't mention Netflix.
I did. I just said it was number one up at the top.
No, you said Apple was number one. I think you
Did
just,
I?
yeah, you're there.
Interesting.
Is that prophetic? Are we going to find in 5 years Apple's number one? Has your inner voice spoken?
I mean, that's interesting because I did read. We're gonna get to it later, but I did read a big breakdown on like on Netflix's content strategy, and
Yeah.
so some people are arguing that like, listen, the reason the content on Netflix has been so brilliant for so long is the just massive funnel of cash and just the ability for Netflix to say yes to everything and not really think critically about any kind of decision making. And I think Apple is still very much in that phase, and Netflix is not. But anyway, yes, Netflix very much at the top, greatest number of
Yeah.
subscribers, making the most money. It still ranks as the one with the best content in terms of reviews. So yeah, and then we got Amazon and Apple are sitting in third and fourth. Of course, the problem there is they really don't need to make money. They just need to kind of employ a few engineers and keep a few writers happy and probably entertain the CEO, I think is the game plan for those.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then in fifth place, we've got this big clump of streamers that are tied to legacy media companies. And they're all going, oh my gosh, we need to make money from this. And we're not making any money.
Hmm.
So what should we do? And the obvious thing here to do would be maybe to bundle. Bundle,
Right.
of course, means you're staying separate, so they would each have their own app. So three streaming services would continue to exist. You would just buy them all together. They would be a little bit cheaper. And the reason that people think that this is a good option is because it has been proven in studies that bundling reduces churn. And of course, churn
Hmm.
is the silver bullet for streaming services. It's the most important factor in terms of how much money you're making and if you can make your way to profitability. Crazy stat for this quarter, but consider this: in this quarter, Q2, streaming services signed up 45.3 million customers, and they lost 43.3 million for a net addition of just 1.9 million.
Ouch.
That's
So the
crazy.
hole at the top is the same size as the hole at the bottom.
Pretty
That's
much.
simple funnel speak.
Yeah.
So that is incredibly well matched. So does that mean they've pretty much hit peak velocity unless something changes?
Yeah, I think so. And I think consumers are getting smarter at probably subscribing to one streaming service, keeping it for 2 months, watching what they want to watch, canceling, moving on to the next one.
Oh, right.
I do think consumers are getting better at saying, okay, I'm going to keep a list. Here's the 5 shows I want to see on Netflix. Okay, on to the next. Here's the
Mm.
3 shows I want to see on Disney. On to the next. Here's the 4 shows I want to see on HBO. And down the list. And that's fair enough because, I mean, when streaming launched, the whole thing was, hey, you're going to save a bunch of money over cable. You're going to get some good content. You're not going to have to watch any ads. Most of that has gone away. I mean, most of the streaming services now are between, what, 15 and 25 dollars a euro, depending on how many users you have. If you're signing up to 5 of them, that's more
Mm.
expensive than cable. That's 100 to 125 a month. Like,
Yeah. I think most people at my stage of life, where you're running a home and you have people who want different services, realize it's you're just honestly just leave your wallet on the doorstep, and hopefully there'll be something left for you when you get back. But
Yeah.
before we dive a little deeper, who's Peacock? I mean, that's a name I'm not familiar with. Maybe we
Yeah.
discussed in the past.
You wouldn't be familiar with Peacock because they are exclusive to the United States. They don't stream outside the US. They are owned by
All right.
Comcast because Comcast owns NBC
Oh,
Universal. So
yeah.
Peacock is the streaming wing of NBC Universal. And in the US, it has a lot of sports rights. That's the big reason why
Right.
people want it. I think
Okay.
um,
Right.
additionally, Paramount Plus, also in the US, has football, I think almost exclusively because CBS is the official television network for the
Hmm.
NFL, and CBS also owned by Paramount Plus. There you go. So it's
Ah.
again a lot of legacy media companies that just happen to own very famous older assets, trying to go direct to consumers. So the bundling thing is kind of option one, but there's also some more radical options that are being considered here that the managers are floating around. Number two would be that they each spin off their streaming assets and combine them into a single company. So just create this
Oh,
kind of
right.
mega streamer. This is
Uh-huh.
by far the high risk, high reward choice because, of course, that means that you have to sever the streamer from the legacy media company. And lots of analysts like that these streamers are tied to these legacy media companies because while the old stuff and the linear TV traditionally makes a bunch of cash, we know that that's declining. And so it's often seen that the streaming service is the life vest for that and creates the balance between these
Hmm.
corporations. So I think that that would be quite difficult to do. However, this mega conglomerate of these three streamers could actually be pretty powerful and competitive against Netflix. They did some surveying on this. And if you combined Max with either Peacock or Paramount, it would have a higher share of movies and TV shows that people want to watch than any other service that's per parent analytics. So, okay,
Oh.
that could actually be a pretty competitive offer
Oh
there.
yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
I like the second option, by the way, a whole new brand, because I think they need to cut through with something special. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah, and obviously the issue here with that is going to be okay. You're effectively combining three companies. How long is that going to take? 2 years probably to do so effectively. You're going to
Mm,
have to get
mm.
licensing
Oh yeah.
agreements with all of your legacy partners and probably get them into a long-term exclusivity deal. That's going to be problematic. The CEOs of all three of these companies are kind of nutso. Apologies to everybody, but like it's true. And then finally, you have to get the regulators. And I don't think regulators
Oh
are going to,
yeah.
you're not going to approve a three company media merge.
No, no. I mean, that is the elephant in the room. There's no getting away from the antitrust
Yeah.
conversation. But before we kind of go there, maybe we shouldn't at all. But this is not the first time that Max, which I think is it's owned by the Warner Brothers, is
Warner
that
Brothers.
correct?
Yep.
So it's the first time. It's not the first time they've considered something drastic.
Mm-hmm.
And there's talk about rumors. There was rumors earlier in the summer about something going on. Refresh my
Yeah.
memory. What's going on with Max?
Yeah, so Warner Brothers Discovery, WBD is the ticker symbol, is the overseer of HBO. HBO then became Max when the rest of the digital assets for Warner Brothers and Discovery were combined to create this kind of mega streamer. That was done under their new CEO, he's been there probably what, a year and a half now, David
Yeah.
Zaslav. David Zaslav, for like by Hollywood people, is kind of viewed as the Antichrist. So sorry to David Zaslav, but like he's very,
Rosemary's Baby too.
yeah,
Rosemary's Baby. I
but
did.
he's very much money, profitability over absolutely everything. And the reason people got really angry at him is within his first 3 months of starting there, he said, right, we need to save money on taxes. So he started shelving projects that were already done. So do you remember there was that big controversy with Batgirl? The movie was done. Brendan Fraser was playing the villain. Apparently, it was a wonderful movie. They spent like
Oh.
over $100 million getting it made. And then they said, we're not going to release it publicly. We'll write it off as a tax loss.
This rings a bell,
Yeah.
and probably because he spoke about it on the podcast. I never heard about it out in the wild. Who played Batgirl?
I think she was an unknown. I think they went and found an unknown. It was meant to be like this big deal, a revitalization of DC because obviously DC has been having issues.
Hmm.
Speaking of Joker. And so that was how David Zaslav came in. He is very much just trying to make as much money as possible. And so an idea that he floated at the beginning of the summer was the idea that they would spin HBO and the legacy movie studio off, and it would become a separate entity. And the reason that they looked into doing this is that Warner Brothers Discovery is absolutely loaded with debt, $39 billion of debt sitting on the books. And this is old debt, because you have to remember,
Right.
Warner Brothers spun off from AT&T. AT&T is effectively debt on wheels. Like it's one of those companies that's so old and went through, that picked up so many companies through the 60s, 70s, and 80s that it has all this debt. It's one of just those
Right.
horrible companies, but because of course it provides telecommunication services, it continues
Yeah.
to make money. It just can't pay off the debt.
Hmm.
And so a bunch of that debt was spun off when Warner Brothers was spun off. And so Zaslav's idea was, we're going to leave all the debt with the linear TV. We know that business is on the collapse anyway, and the assets that are performing well, we'll spin all those guys off, and then maybe they can have a run for their money there. The issue,
And that's Max, is it?
yeah, so that's Max.
Yeah, right.
The issue
Gotcha.
there is, you got to get it, you're going to have to get it through the regulators, but number two, you're going to have to get it past your creditors, which is highly unlikely because all those people who loaned you money, again, made the assumption of, yes, linear TV is in decline, the streaming service will save us. So getting the streaming service away from those creditors is just going to be impossible. But this is the kind of radical thinking that David Zaslav has become famous for, and he's always looking for this exit strategy. He's always looking for a way to make money. He's also, his compensation package is absolutely unbelievable. I think he makes like $100 million a year. So there is definitely been long-standing rumors that Max is trying to do something radical. The idea, I think, that I floated last year was I could see the HBO brand being spun off and sold. And I made the guess that it would go to Apple because I just thought, HBO makes really wonderful, expensive content, but it only kind of puts out a couple projects a year. Isn't that a perfect streaming match for the way Apple does streaming? So
and it's mostly family friendly. It's in keeping with the Apple brand, if you like, and HBO makes
with the few, with the Game of Thrones and the Sopranos thrown in, you a bit of murder. Right. But just a little, you have to have one. Yeah. You have to have one. You always have to have one.
Yeah, but you do Curb Your Enthusiasm. Who wouldn't want to own that?
I mean, bit of curmudgeony fun.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So how's it all playing out then, Anne-Marie? Where are we going?
I mean, as of right now, nothing is happening because, again, as I said, 3 fairly aggressive CEOs, none of them want to give up that direct-to-consumer relationship. But it's definitely something that I think they're going to come back to the table more and more, because what's the alternative? You either bundle or you're going to get on your hands and knees and pray that somebody goes bankrupt before you do. Because the alternative is you shut down the streaming service and you go back to the original model where you say, okay, we've run the numbers. It'll actually just be cheaper for us to license all this content to another streamer, to license to Netflix. And to be honest, if I was a legacy media company, that's probably what I would be thinking, because the spend to get these streaming services off the ground has got to be pretty phenomenal. And as you continually complain about, Paramount has just the worst app. And so you'd probably just say, right, cut your losses. We're going to start licensing all the Paramount content. Like, it just seems...
It's a hot mess, but it feels like a hot mess that's fixable, because the assets that each of those 3 parties own are beloved by millions, tens of millions of people. And in fact, potentially tens of millions more if they broaden that audience. So it's actually a very interesting corporate jigsaw puzzle. I saw the New York Times during the week published a piece, and the headline was "How Everyone Got Lost in Netflix's Library," which was a broad overview of the Netflix library and how consumers interact with it. Were there any good insights for the industry more generally?
Yeah, it was a really interesting read that took a deep dive into Netflix's positioning in the industry, its catalog, its watch metrics, and where we go from here. And actually, it does touch a bit on the Joker 2 story that we talked about at the beginning. So that's really good. Look at us looping all the way back around. But the first thing it does right off the top is it does say Netflix was very much a disruptor in the television industry. And that's because it forced the industry to make better content, because it removed the necessity of simultaneous broadcast. And that eliminated an issue that actually, interestingly, was first raised by David Foster Wallace, the famous fiction writer from the 1990s. He said in 1993, television is the way it is simply because people tend to be really similar in their vulgar and stupid interests, and wildly different in their refined and moral and intelligent interests. Basically, Netflix allowed the industry to make more intellectual content by avoiding the law of averages and taking a bunch of little diverse audiences over one consolidated one. So I actually thought that was a really interesting point, and is probably true. That's how we do get some weird and funky shows out of Netflix that end up surprisingly popular. But it's also worth mentioning that Netflix is a product of the post-2008 technology-enabled blitz scaling era. And the name of that era actually comes from LinkedIn founder Reed Hastings. He actually used to give a class on
Isn't
that.
that Reed Hoffman? No. I know it's Reed Hastings. I
Reed
was getting
Hastings, yeah.
confused.
Reed
No,
Hoffman
Reed Hastings. No. Reed Hastings
is
is
he
Netflix. It's
Netflix,
Reed
and Reed
Hoffman.
Hoffman is,
It's
there we
Reed
go.
Hoffman. It's the other guy,
Apologies. Oh,
blitzscanning. I read it.
too
Yeah.
many Reeds.
Too many Reeds.
Yeah, which is
Charlie
actually
needs to
interesting
be a
because there
less
was a
Reed.
class at Stanford called Technology Enabled Blitzscaling, and both of them lectured on the course. So there you go.
Wow.
Both interested in the
Oh, wow.
concept.
Some course. That's quite elite, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, you'd want to go there. But basically, that's that idea that we talk about all the time where its massive scale was achieved using venture capital money and using really cheap debt, and profitability was an afterthought. So, probably the most famous example is Uber.
Yeah.
Everybody gets their own
Yeah.
private chauffeur. We'll all make money in 10 years. That hasn't happened yet. But anyway, so in this way, Netflix is actually kind of alone in the streaming wars. A media studies professor, Amanda D. Lotz, is quoted as saying, Netflix is a zebra among horses. Apple TV and Amazon Prime are corporate complements to massive technology businesses. Paramount Plus, Peacock, and Disney are extension of legacy entertainment studios. And Max is the Frankenstein hybrid of Netflix's closest living ancestor, HBO. So when that was pointed out to me, I was kind of like, oh, yeah. I hadn't really considered that before, that Netflix is the OG in many ways. However, when we take a look at Netflix's recent viewership data dump, it can actually be kind of difficult to see where the streamer is going to go from here in terms of content, because their sheer scale has now made it pretty difficult to figure out what consumers like. So currently, Netflix has 16,000 titles of content, but most consumers are really only interacting with the top 25. And that has left tens of thousands of pieces floundering down the bottom without really anywhere to go. And the article author, Wiley Stanley, states that consumers have a keyhole view on a vast vista. And I actually thought that was a pretty great metaphor, and that's pretty much exactly how it is. So basically, as Netflix continues to produce and add content, this problem is just going to get exacerbated, making it really difficult to measure what consumers actually like, because as we know, passive viewing is a pretty big thing. Rewatching is a pretty big thing. I know a lot of people who leave Netflix on for their dogs. Like, it's just too hard to figure out what people actually like. And quoted in the piece is a guy named Matt Stoller, and he's an anti-monopolist writer. And he has a theory that Hollywood has gotten so big, it really can't discover what people want anymore. By contrast, he cites the success of Back to the Future back in the 80s. And he said when that came out in 1985, it only opened at about 1,400 theaters. And that crept up to 1,550 theaters by the end of August. So that was its summer run. But it actually stayed in more than 1,000 theaters up until Christmas. Imagine that. It was in theaters for more than 9 months. And that allowed this relationship between theaters and audiences and distributors to be continually evolving and changing. So as word of mouth got around, they could say, hey, Back to the Future seems really popular. Let's put it in 100 more theaters. Let's put it in 100 more. And that relationship has been completely changed now, even within a theatrical release, because as we know, talking about Joker, that thing opened big, 4,000 theaters opening week. But as we know, if it doesn't do the numbers, it'll be gone in 4 weeks. And that is not how things used to operate. And that's even more difficult if your original movie or television show is going to release on a streamer, because how many days do you think you realistically have once you release to try and get that in front of a significant audience? I mean, it's 7, maybe.
Yeah, you would think so.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because it seems that Netflix now has the strategic opposite of what you described on a recent podcast. I don't know if it was you and me or you and Mike. It's all blurring in my mind now. But how Apple have just said less is more. It's like 30 titles. They're all high quality. When you go in to find something to watch, you haven't got an infinite list. And you describing there that Netflix's library is so vast, you could spend the rest of the year just reading the titles of the movie or of the programs. And nobody wants that. Just sit down in the evening. It's just show me something I want. However, they are so far out the long tail. They have, I presume, content that appeals to every single interest. I think they can they can do better on recommending to me something I feel like. They have that data.
Yeah, and it's very similar as well to who you were talking about at the top, Mubi, who just said, we're going to do independent cinema, we're going to do cheaper films, but there's only going to be 30 of them. And some of them are going to be foreign language. But Mubi does have kind of a cult following. And I think a lot of streamers are trying to look into that now. How do we get better at spending money? How do we get better at picking content? And that means that, again, the article author, Wiley Stanley, he blames this epidemic of mass entertainment being produced as the reason why we have so many TV shows these days that are on streamers that are just kind of fine. even though they have all the caveats of a really great show. You know, they look expensive, they're reasonably smart, and they might be packed with talent, but then you watch it and you're like, well, that was okay, I guess. And he said it's interesting because it's mass entertainment completely severed from market signal. Because again, the most important metric for these streamers is churn rate. Yes, they can look at viewership, but as I said, viewership can be skewed by a number of factors that you can't really control. And so, you know, these streamers have more information about our viewing habits than ever before, but they actually don't really have a great understanding of what the audience wants. Consequently, this has meant that Stanley concludes that the great television we've witnessed during the streaming era isn't purposeful, but more of a happy accident because Netflix has had so much money, it basically couldn't say no. You know, if Martin Scorsese says, hey, I want to make a movie and I need $150 million, Netflix at the time had so much money, just went, yeah, you're Martin Scorsese. It'll probably be a great movie. And then we got The Irishman with a 3.5-hour runtime. And yes, it was a good movie, but wow. And so an example of this kind of happy accident funding is a TV show called I Think You Should Leave. It's a sketch comedy show. I believe it's in its 3rd season right now. It's over at Netflix. I Think You Should Leave is constantly being used in memes and GIFs and short clips all over the internet. It has this really long viewing tail because people keep discovering it naturally online. But when you go and look at the 2023 watch metrics for Netflix, it wasn't in the top 10, it wasn't in the top 100, it wasn't even in the top 3,000. So now Netflix is in this difficult position of saying, we have this TV show that's doing really great on social media, but nobody is watching it, but they might watch it, so we can't cancel it, but we're trying to save money on content. So what should we do? And so that is really, really difficult for Netflix because now it can't measure what is successful content. So how can it plan for its content in the future, particularly as it moves into this new year? And me and Mike just talked about this maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. Netflix wants to cut its content budget. It has to cut its content budget. It spends tens of billions a year. And that's really wonderful for empowering creatives. But also Netflix's whole appeal to investors right now is that it's profitable. And so it needs to continue that profitability. And so if I'm Netflix right now, I need to be thinking less about, okay, what content are we funding, and more about how are we measuring the success of content. And so I would be, as you said, I'd be looking at the suggestive algorithm, improving that, trying to figure out how we can get TV shows that maybe came out 6 months ago or 12 months ago that do seem to be really beloved by people. How do we get that in front of a new audience? I'd be investing in ways to engage audiences with older culture, probably within social media or within traditional media. An example of this is they have a YouTube television show called... Is it called Watching Netflix or something like that? And it's hosted by 2 drag queens, Trixie and Katya, and they just sit and watch Netflix. They just
so it's like it's Gogglebox. Is that what it is?
Effectively, yeah. And they just
watch
Netflix originals. You know, the episodes are only 10 minutes long. They critique them. It doesn't matter what show it is. It could be House of Cards or it could be Heartstopper. Right. You know, it could be.
And are they witty? Are they insightful? Yes. Are they clever?
And it's very. And I think it's very funny. And like I have most definitely watched TV shows that they have watched, even if they have absolutely ripped them apart, because that the whole point is that
it's influencing.
Exactly. And so if I'm Netflix, I know that there is a really orthodox audience on social media who really love movie critics. You know, there are movie critics who are like quite famous on YouTube. I'd be trying to tap into that audience so you can find people who can, talk and make people excited about some foreign film that you've licensed or something like that. And then I think finally they need to be finding better ways to measure not just engagement, because that term is too broad. You probably need to be measuring enjoyment. And I think that might need, like, I remember when Netflix launched back in the day, they used to make you rate all the titles. Do you remember that? Like it was out of 5 stars or whatever. I think that has been removed and it's now thumbs up, thumbs down. They probably
really like, dislike. It's 2 shades of like and 1 shade of dislike.
Yeah, so they probably need to be looking at ways to get more information out of audiences if they want their content to be more purposeful moving forward. Because a concern that I raised with Mike, and this is still sitting in the back of my mind, is they seem to want to lean into the cheapest content possible, and that's going to be reality television. And yes, there definitely should be a budget for some reality TV. People love that stuff. But the thing that made Netflix special was House of Cards. It was The Crown. It was Stranger Things.
Squid Game. All
exactly.
That kind of
and so you still need to be producing that mid-budget content. You just need to be figuring out how do we understand that content before it reaches audiences. And so very interesting time is streaming at the minute. Everybody's trying to save money. Everybody is basically trying to figure out how we can spend less than $10 billion a year producing TV and movies. But yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on. I think Netflix continues to reign supreme, but just how does it manage that supremacy, I guess?
Nice one, Emery.
Yep.
Okay, I'm just going to call that segment there and remind our listeners to just sign up for Invest Plus, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you? Whichever, just help a local business and sign up for
There
Invest
you go.
Plus. It's only $199, and we're going to
Hmm.
give you $50 off. So a $10,000 service that we've priced at $149, you'd be off your mind.
Yep.
Email us at pod@mywallstreet.com for that discount,
There we go.
folks.
All right,
What else we
Emmett.
talk about?
Well, I think you're going to take over from here now. One of the
Right.
few industries undergoing a radical overhaul. Few industries, as we just talked about, a different industry undergoing a radical overhaul. But we're going to
Yeah.
talk about automobiles. We haven't talked about them
Mm.
in a while. Um,
Yeah.
you mentioned to me yesterday that it would be interesting to discuss EVs, which are set to seriously benefit the Amazon. Oh, the Amazon rainforest. I thought you meant like Amazon the company. I was like, oh, how are
No, I
they
mean
selling
Amazon,
EVs?
the company.
Are
I mean
they?
Amazon,
Okay.
Yes, you bet. Look, let me elaborate. So
All right, go on.
basically, yeah, you bet. So, well, on the top line, it's pretty well reported that Amazon is set to achieve $20 billion in annual savings through the move to EVs and autonomous
Wow.
technology. Yeah, I know. So, like when you look
Like
at
it.
Amazon, it is really, really good because you're looking at not one of, probably the most efficient mass market delivery services in the world, and yet they're out to achieve something like 20 billion in savings through EV and autonomous technology. And the reason is because the last mile delivery of everything, if you ask me, is
Mhm.
usually the trickiest. It's usually the
Yeah,
most
yeah,
expensive. You know yourself, small roads and doorbells and delivery
yeah. Hmm.
boxes and the likes, and a notice on the window saying drop it into Mary next door or whatever. And even in the telecoms industry, getting fiber optic into homes is notoriously tricky because it's kind of point to multi-point. And that same logic applies when everyone's front door has its own little set of rules. So Amazon holds a 15.7% stake in Rivian, which I'd say most of our listeners know.
Mm.
And it also acquired an autonomous vehicle company, I think in 2020, called Zoox. It's spelled Zoox, Zoox. Um, and it's now really positioned to leverage EVs for some serious cost reductions. So listen to this. Currently, the fuel costs represent about 20 to 25% of the per mile expenses in delivery, like logistics. And by shifting to EVs, Amazon can cut that per mile energy cost by about 50%. So there's saving category number one. On top of that, wages and benefits account for 40% of delivery costs. So autonomous driving
Yeah.
would drastically reduce the need for human drivers as well. So you've saving category one, which is electric, saving category two, which is EVs with less people behind a wheel. And I thought it was quite interesting that there was a report from JMP Securities that estimated that if Amazon fully deploys autonomous vehicles for the middle mile transport, and completes its transition to electric vehicles for the last mile delivery, it will cut global shipping costs by 20%, which very conveniently is $20 billion. Now, in the short term, Amazon is on track to save $7 billion. So it's not just a pipe dream. This has begun. They're going to save $7 billion annually as they convert the last mile fleet to Rivian electric vans by 2030. So the strategy is also aligned with something close to your heart, Emery, as a lover of businesses that have climate and sustainability at the core of their missions. But it has obviously huge climate goals, and Amazon is aiming to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2040 through initiatives like the Climate Pledge. But just beyond fuel savings and human capital cost savings and all that kind of stuff, EVs offer lower maintenance costs compared to traditional internal combustion engines. Like anyone who's looked inside an engine, the hood of their car, knows there's quite a lot of moving parts. If you own an electric car, generally the first while is realizing there's nothing to service here.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a point that if you buy a Tesla, you don't bring it in for service. They come to you, and a service does not take long. So you have all of these kind of efficiencies that are starting to compound. And then when on top of that you deploy EVs, and Amazon can also go for carbon credits,
Oh
the
yeah, yeah,
tax thing
yeah.
that you can do.
Mm.
So there's so many reasons for Amazon to really push the Rivian delivery thing, and you can see why they've invested in strong contenders early.
Mm-hmm. Well, just very briefly, as you said, the last mile is the most difficult. So they can get it on an automated vehicle that'll get it to your front door. But how does it get out of the van to the front door?
Well, that is a very good question, Anne-Marie, and I'm going to riff here and say they have a drone that lifts it out and drops it. No, I
Wow.
actually don't know. No, no, no.
I
They
was
do
wa-
have no, no.
I
They
was
have
thinking
invested in
catapult. Just a little, just a
trebuchet.
just a
I love
fling.
that.
Just
Well, this is true. Well, I would imagine, like, you're right. There is definitely the logistics of hand to hand, person to person is very difficult to substitute, and I
mm,
do not know the answer to that question. I was hoping you wouldn't ask me because
mm,
they are independently investing in drone technology,
yeah.
which is a different work stream altogether. And I think most of us have seen a variation of a drone drop package on
Yeah,
a
yeah.
delivery mat that can even, that's fine if you've got a roof garden, if you live in New York, or if you've got your own square land, if you live in Ireland. But I really don't. So drone will fill certain needs. But you're right. I do not know how an autonomous vehicle, perhaps there's going to be a shift to the door person, the building manager, when the Amazon delivery van arrives, that there's an increased responsibility for that person to bring in the packages. But
Mm.
I don't know. And that's a very good one. I'm sure they've thought long and hard about it. But
That's probably a company that we should be creating right now. That's the
tell me,
that's
which one? Door
the
people.
yeah, the walk from the truck to the front door. We got to figure something
Yeah.
out there. We got to like get a Roomba, and
Oh,
the
yes.
Roomba
A
goes and picks it
Roomba.
up and comes back. Which actually
Yeah,
Roombas are
exactly.
also owned by Amazon now. So you know what? That's probably why they bought iRobot. That's what they wanted.
And it can clean your driveway
Cut the
when it's
grass.
on the way
Be
down.
chilling
Cut the
out there.
grass.
There you go.
Yeah,
All right.
exactly.
So, how are they progressing in terms of expanding this electric fleet? I mean, as you said there, it's increased efficiency
Yeah.
phenomenally. So, I'd say this is now something that they're doubling down on.
Well, the numbers we have at the moment are for July 2024. So they reported deploying over 15,000 EVs, electric delivery vans, in fairness. Now,
Mm.
so e-vans in the US from Rivian, and it plans to expand the fleet to 100,000 by 2030s, which is about, I suppose, what, 6 to 7 fold increase from the fleet size at the moment. And 2030 really is only around the corner. It's five years away. So in large part, most part, in fact, thanks to Rivian, vans have battery systems designed for extensive delivery routes and allows them to complete these daily schedules on a single charge. So that's currently about 400 miles on one charge, which is pretty impressive. The range anxiety that a buyer has for a car is, at 400 miles as opposed to
Mm.
kilometers, you're talking some serious stuff. But what's just as interesting is that just to support this growing EV fleet, Amazon has invested really heavily in charging infrastructure. It's installed 17,000 charging stations across 120 delivery stations in the US, and that also is growing. And then there's also halo benefits, such as Amazon has sourced the electricity for these charging stations from renewable energy providers. They've probably installed their own solar, I am unsure, but certainly it's renewable energy that's being pumped into the vans. And again, this aligns with their sustainability goals. And apparently, Amazon's use of electric vehicle vans has already enabled the company to deliver 800 million packages, which is precisely the number delivered to this house in any given week, I reckon.
Mm.
Oh yeah, also Amazon is also exploring other electric transport solutions like electric cargo bikes and, as I mentioned, drones. And yeah, it's all going electric, folks. So you mightn't have hit your corner of the globe, but that's where it's going.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, you mentioned sustainability goals there. That's something that's close to my heart. I think it's close to your heart as well with your big barrels of water that you keep collecting. And
Yeah.
so I'm wondering there, what does Amazon's electric and autonomous vehicle strategy, how much of an impact do you think that has on its sustainability goals, particularly the autonomous stuff? Because obviously the electric stuff is a bit obvious, but the autonomous is
Yeah,
interesting.
you're right. You're right. The EV is the obvious one,
Mm.
and the related tech like no drivers. It does align with commitment to achieving net zero emissions by 2040, with this climate pledge. Because as if I suppose that has to be pointed out, EVs improve air quality in
Yeah.
neighborhoods, and they all the other stuff to decrease noise pollution and no more fossil fuels. And they're also equipped with advanced safety features such as collision detection. So, like these autonomous vehicles, generally tidy up the human led mistakes that are involved when you've somebody behind the wheel of a car. So collision detection, lane assist, automatic emergency braking, all that kind of tech, which further protects drivers and the public safety. But from a financial perspective, Amazon's move to EVs and autonomous vehicles has already shown positive results. And the company's operating margin for its North American business has improved to 5.6% from 3.9% a year ago, due in part to the cost efficiencies provided by the EV fleet, which they've broken out in their quarterly report. And free cash flow for the business has gone from 32 billion in 2023 to 48 billion in the last 12 months. And in fairness, and high margin advertising really have contributed to that profit growth. AWS sales has increased 19%. Ad sales is growing by 20%. Everything is growing. And the company's investments in electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles do complement, I suppose, the bigger effort. And when you just look at the business at a 40,000 foot view, you can just see that is not only the right thing to do, but it's the inevitable move for the business, and that in a couple of years, the things we're discussing now will be just as normal as the iPhone or a smartphone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, finally, they were discussing Rivian and Amazon's investment in Rivian. They're a little bit expensive, but would you choose to drive a Rivian?
Yeah, I would actually. I mean, I don't know how much they cost, but certainly from how they look, and I saw the vehicle's debut in Charlie Berman and Ewan McGregor's Apple show, Long Way Up, or I think it was Long Way Up, where they went fully electric. They drove from the very, very southern tip of South America right up to LA. It's a brilliant show on Apple TV. Well, it's brilliant if you're me. I don't know what you like, folks. I loved it. I was in my happy place, sitting there with a smile throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
And the Rivian van just looked badass. I was thinking, yeah, I'd like one of those. That's brilliant. Now I don't need a van. I've nothing to carry. Like I'm not an orthodontist in America.
Yeah.
Like I don't.
They have to carry the retainers, obviously.
So yeah, I drive one. What about you? What do you think of them?
I have seen a couple, because I just came back from America, and I did see a couple Rivian trucks in the wild.
Oh.
They look nice. They look like trucks. All trucks look the same, unless it's the Cybertruck, which looks like some horrible MC Escher hallucination. I saw a couple Cybertrucks in the US too, in Washington DC. Those should not be street legal. They're too big. They're huge.
That's what I was reading. Too wide.
Yeah, they're massive.
If they're too wide for an American road, come on, give me a break.
It looks like you cut half a school bus off and then said, "Perfect, that can be a car." It's huge, and every person I saw get out of a Cybertruck, I was like, "Why are you driving this massive truck?
And
You work at the U.S. Capitol. What are you hauling?"
That is so funny. Well, they have it because they can. God bless America, Anne-Marie. I'm looking forward to seeing one. There was one in Ireland only on display there for a couple of weeks, and I didn't get up to see it. I didn't have time, but I'm very keen to see it and sit in. But anyway, that's it. Okay, so you're not a truck person. You're Rivian, Tesla, Cybertruck, whatever. You're just kind of like, if it gets me to A to B.
Yeah, pretty much. And I know that there's been discussions in Irish politics recently about them saying we need to maybe tax larger cars, because there's really no reason that most people should be driving such massive cars, particularly in Ireland. The roads are so small. And I am becoming quite anti-car. I have been radicalized, particularly because I take public transport pretty much everywhere. So I'm like, why do we need cars? But I just came back from America. I was in New York, and I know everybody in New York complains about the subway. But coming from Ireland, going to New York and seeing how many subway lines run and how deep underground they are, I'm like, it's incredible that we did this. We dug down here. We put a tube down here. There's a train.
I was in London. I was in London 2 weeks ago to meet my friend Gary, and I just am such admiration when you go to a real city and you go, this is incredible. Thousands of miles of underground trains. It's really, truly amazing.
Yeah, particularly when you think about, sometimes they built those. The metro in Paris started in the late 1800s. It's crazy that they went down there and they were like, we're going to put a train down here. What?
Yeah, it is amazing. Anne-Marie, you know something? I've done about 240 podcasts, so I can't be expected to remember how we finish a show, because usually Mike does that. I don't know if we just go, the end. Amazing. I have literally sat here for hundreds of podcasts and Mike says something and then everybody knows it's over. I can't even remember what I do. I think I just say to everyone, okay, folks, that's it. Hope you enjoyed this week's show. I've been joined by Anne-Marie Kingsland, my colleague, my friend, my my sayer of all things to do with business, your unbelievable Emery, your bottomless pit of knowledge. It's like the muses sing and the fountains explode when you start talking about stuff. So thank you for joining me. Thanks everyone for listening. Subscribe to Invest Plus, email pod@mywallstreet.com. That's mywallst.com. Do it immediately because there's only going to be 7 vouchers, $50 off. The end.
There you go. And sure, if you're driving a car that's driving itself, you can do that while en route. You don't even need to pull over. There you go. All right. See you next week.
Well done. See you next week, Emma.